Tonight, someone is going to pay $60 for a lobster. They will crack the shell with a metal tool, dip the meat in warm butter, and call it a treat. 400 years ago, that same animal was considered garbage, the kind of thing fed to people who had no say in what they ate. Prisoners, servants, animals. There's a story you've probably heard about this. Colonial prisons supposedly had actual laws limiting how often they could feed lobster to inmates, because too much of it counted as cruel and unusual punishment. It's a great story. It's also, mostly, not true. But the real history of lobster is even stranger than the myth. Start in the early 1600s, on the coast of New England. European settlers arrive on a shoreline absurdly overstocked with lobster. Storms wash them up in piles 2 feet deep. Catching one required no skill. You could walk into the shallows and pick them up with your hands. Anything that abundant starts to feel worthless, not because it's bad, because there's no effort attached to it. So colonists fed lobster to their pigs and ground it into fertilizer. They fed it to the people with the least power to refuse it. Prisoners near the coast ate it because it was the cheapest protein around. There's a famous letter from 1623, written by Plymouth Colony's governor, William Bradford, apologizing to newly arrived settlers because the best meal he could offer them was a lobster, or a piece of fish, without bread, without anything else but a cup of spring water. He wasn't bragging about a feast. He was apologizing for one. So where does the prison law story come from? That specific claim has been repeated for decades, even showing up in a famous essay by David Foster Wallace. But when historians went looking for the actual laws, the court records, they couldn't find them. Food historians point out a simpler problem. Lobster isn't easy to prepare at scale. You have to boil it, crack it, pick out the meat by hand. Who's doing that labor every day for an entire prison? Colonial jail budgets were thin, struggling to afford basics, let alone a daily seafood operation. So the truth sits between the myth and the dismissal. Prisoners probably did eat lobster because it was cheap, but the colorful detail that laws existed to limit it appears to have been added later, a story that felt true, repeated until it became fact. Sound familiar? Your brain does this constantly, with information far more important than seafood. Here's the actual turn. For 200 years, lobster's status barely changed. Then railroads expanded, and lobster could travel inland, packed in ice, to cities where people had never seen one fresh. To them, it wasn't a cheap nuisance. It was exotic. Wealthy tourists started vacationing on the coast too, and restaurants began serving lobster as a luxury. Notice what changed. Not the lobster, the audience, and the distance between the audience and the source. The same meat went from, "This is what we feed prisoners," to, "This is what we feed honored guests," without the animal changing at all. The moment something stops being easy to get, your brain starts treating it as valuable. The economist Thorstein Veblen called this conspicuous consumption. People value things because they're hard to obtain, not because they're actually better. So think about that $60 lobster dinner again. You're not paying for the meat. You're paying for scarcity manufactured by geography and timing, layered onto an animal that, 400 years ago, was too undignified to feed anyone with a choice in the matter. And somewhere in that gap, a myth got attached. A myth about laws and cruelty that almost certainly never existed. Not because anyone needed to lie, just because the story was too good not to repeat. This isn't really a story about seafood. It's a story about you, and every time you've assumed something was worthless, simply because it was within reach. Tonight, someone is going to pay $60 for a lobster, and 400 years ago, that same animal was the cheapest thing on the table.